Hello. Welcome back or welcome to my YouTube channel. If you don't know, my name is Megan and glad to be back. I haven't done a video in a while, but I wanted to bring you a new true crime video. I'm planning on doing this video in a soft-spoken voice rather than a whispering voice, so I really hope that you enjoy it. If you don't know why I am speaking softly and why I have been whispering in my previous videos, it is for the purpose of ASMR, which is to help people relax while they're listening to the stories. If you don't like it, that's okay, and you're more than welcome to leave, and I hope you find the video for you. If you do enjoy true crime ASMR, I really hope that you enjoy this video. So the case today that I'm going to be talking about is the Axeman of New Orleans. It's actually a case that was recommended to me by my husband, who had been reading a book and it had mentioned the Axeman of New Orleans, and he thought it would be a good idea for me to look into it, and it has been, but this case has boggled my brain. It has completely sent me down rabbit hole after rabbit hole, and you'll learn why when I tell you more about it. It's so interesting, and from reading more about the victims of the attacks, it has raised more questions for me than it has answered anything. But I think that's part of why a lot of us enjoy true crime. I enjoy trying to figure it out. So this case, the attacks that happened, there were a number of different attacks that happened that were attributed to the same killer, and it was the person that the police and the media had kind of named. They'd named him the Axeman because an axe had turned up in a lot of these cases. Now, some of these attacks, the motive does seem the same, and there are also kind of some oddities in between, but I'll go into that a little bit more. So in this video, I'm actually planning on kind of focusing more on the victims, because we don't know who the murderer was, who the Axeman was, if these were committed by the same person. But all of the attacks that I'm going to talk to you about have all been attributed to this same person. So I have my notes down here. I'm going to be looking down. The first murder took place in 1918, and it's believed that the killer may have also been active in years previous. There were attacks similar that had happened in 1911. At the time, people did think that it was the same person committing these crimes, but because of the lack of evidence, because it was harder at that time, now this was in the early 1900s, it was harder then to store evidence, to get DNA and all of those types of things. It was harder to actually put these cases together. So my plan today is to focus more on the victims and tell you a little bit more about it. And from researching these victims, it has kind of given me more of an idea on what the city was like at the time and what their lives were like. A lot of the people that I'm going to be talking about had emigrated to the United States because for whatever reason they had left their home countries, but they had settled and started working, started their families, and sadly for some of them their lives came to an end. So before I do get into the traumatic part of this video, I just wanted to say viewer discretion is advised, and this is not meant for younger viewers or anyone who is going to be unsettled by true crime. At the time that these crimes actually took place, New Orleans itself was kind of complex. It was just coming out of World War I, and a lot of the residents had enlisted in the war. A lot of people had lost their lives. As you can imagine, with a war, fathers didn't come home, brothers didn't come home. In the early 1900s, there was a jazz scene, there was Mardi Gras, there was poverty, there was racial tensions. A lot of the the people living in New Orleans at the time had immigrated from European countries like Italy and Germany. In and around when these crimes took place, in September 1918, New Orleans had their own pandemic. An oil tanker had docked in New Orleans on its way to Boston, and on this tanker were workers who had been carrying and been unwell with the Spanish influenza. The first attack that was attributed to the Axeman was carried out shortly before influenza landed in New Orleans. The date was the 22nd of May 1918. Giuseppe Joseph Maggio, he was a baker who was born in Sicily on the 20th of November 1876. He immigrated to America and settled in New Orleans on the 25th of May in 1899. With his wife, Caterina Stabile, she was born in 1882 in Castelmere in Italy. I believe that's how it's pronounced. I'm not 100% sure, so I apologise. The couple married in New Orleans on the 13th of December 1903 and settled in a home located at 4901 Magnolia Street. From here, they ran a grocery store and a bar. The family lived behind the grocery store. At the time, a lot of the grocers would have lived in the adjoining rooms. The couple were known by locals as Mr. and Mrs. Joe. Joseph came from a large family. His mother and father, Giuseppe Maggio and Vincentia Verdi, had also emigrated to America. Joseph's father passed away in 1899 and his mother settled in Arkansas along with her daughter, Joseph's sister, Maria. Joseph's brothers, Andrew, Salvatore, and Giacchino. Now, this brother, I believe it's Giacchino. I really do apologise if I'm pronouncing that wrong. I believe in news reports that brother is referred to as Jacob. So, for the sake of not mispronouncing the name throughout this video, I'm going to refer to him as Jacob. All of the brothers settled in New Orleans. So, in 1918, Joseph and Catherine had shared the rooms in the back of the property on Magnolia Street with Joseph's brother Andrew. Andrew ran a barber shop quite close by. The attack on Joseph and Catherine Maggio took place on the 22nd of May in 1918. On the evening before the murders, Andrew had returned from being out drinking. This is something that he had reported to the police after the attack. When he turned in for the night, his brother and sister-in-law were still awake and alive and well. Sometime later, the couple had gone to bed and sadly would not see another day. At around 4:45 a.m., Andrew awoke to what he described to the police as moaning. He felt uneasy when he woke and banged on the wall to his brother's bedroom. When he got no response, he left the home and walked to his other brother's house, Jacob, and the two returned to Catherine and Joseph's home. They got back to Joseph and Catherine's home around 5:15 and entered the bedroom of Joseph and Catherine to find a horrifying picture. They found their brother Joseph lying diagonally across the bed with his feet touching the ground, covered in blood but seemingly still alive. Catherine, sadly, was no longer alive. They found her body lying on the floor alongside the bed, resting across Joseph's feet. The room itself was a horror scene. Blood was smeared across the floors, across the bed, and splattered up the wall. Very quickly, Jacob called for the police and Andrew called for an ambulance from the local charity hospital. Joseph Maggio passed away shortly after the ambulance had arrived and had been unable to provide any detail on the attack or his attacker before he passed away. During the initial investigation, the police believed that robbery was the motive. This didn't last very long because whenever they searched the home, the police realised that there was nothing missing. A small amount of money, but all of Catherine's jewellery and all of the other valuables in their house were still there. They discovered that the point of entry was the back door to the living quarters of the building. So the bottom panel of the back door had been removed, and the screwdriver used to remove the panel was found later on in the Margio's back garden. The police had also searched the Margio's next door neighbour's backyard, and whenever they had carried out the search, they found a blood-soaked suit, a pair of socks, and a blood-soaked razor. The razor that they found, they believed, looked to be like one that would be used by a barber. So immediately, first person to question would be Andrew, who was a barber. When the bodies were inspected, it was discovered that both of their throats had been cut prior to them being bludgeoned and hacked with an axe. The axe was later found in the bathroom of the home. The axe belonged to Joseph Margio and usually would be kept by the back door. Police believe that the axe had been used to disguise the real cause of death, which was the slits to Joseph and Catherine's throats. There are a few online sources that mention a note written in chalk on the sidewalk not far from the Margio home, which said something along the lines of, "Mrs. Margio is going to sit up tonight, just like Mrs. Tony." Now, the accuracy of this is kind of questionable because I have seen other people mentioning that the note was written in blood. I've seen other reports where people have said that the note said something different. So there could have been a note. Also could just be something that has been created down the line. That one, I'm not sure where that came from. Mrs. Margio is going to sit up tonight just like Mrs. Tony. Who is Mrs. Tony? Now, this is where the rabbit hole is continuing for me, because I am going to go back and start looking at the attacks that happened in 1911 and anything that happened from then on, because I do kind of wonder, could Mrs. Tony have been one of the people attacked back then, and this could be a copycat or something like that. The police officers that were investigating the Margio case were Detective Theodore Obitz and Detective Harry Dodson. Their first suspect was Andrew Margio. That was because of the razor found next door and the fact that Andrew was in the house when it happened. It was kind of questioned how did you not hear it happening? And what he had said to the police was that he was drunk the night before and he must have slipped through it. There is another report as well where there's a few that say that one of the people who worked with Andrew in the barbershop, or one of his employees maybe, had said that he took a razor home with him, or he took this particular razor home with him to mend it. There was also a shirt found in Andrew's room which had a red stain on it, and whenever the stain was later tested, it was found to be red wine. So he could have been, as he was saying, completely off his face and just did not hear it happening. Andrew was actually held for questioning until he was then released on the 25th of May, so he was held for 3 days. While he was being held, he was refused the opportunity to attend his brother's funeral, and he was questioned for around 4 hours straight. His release came after the police found that the razor blade used did not belong to Andrew Margio. The investigation went cold after this, and the police had no further evidence or witnesses or anything to go on. An interesting story that I actually did find that happened after was involving the police officers who were investigating this case. So the day after Andrew Margio was released, Detective Theodore Obitz was shot and killed during what was called a scuffle. It broke out while he and Detective Harry Dodson were investigating local robberies. A teenager was actually sentenced to death for shooting Detective Obitz. The teenager had admitted to the robberies. He'd also admitted to the shooting, but when the execution date got closer, he then makes a claim that he had been tortured into telling the police that he had shot the detective. He actually then accused Detective Harry Dodson of shooting the police officer. From here on, there were no further leads, but there was, I think, actually in that report about the two detectives. It was kind of it's been kind of wondered, were they getting close to finding out who had killed the Margios? After this, the case completely went cold. There was no further evidence. Nothing else was reported on it. The couple were buried together in St. Louis Cemetery in New Orleans. Just a month after the first attack, another grocery store owner by the name of Louis Bessemer, he claimed to be a Polish national, was to experience a similar horror. He lived and worked from 1514 Dorgenois Street. I'm hoping I'm saying that right. Louis Bessemer had moved to New Orleans 3 months prior and lived in a similar environment to the Margios. He lived in the quarters behind his grocery shop. On the morning of the 27th of June 1918, Mr. John Zanker was carrying out his usual bakery delivery to Louis Bessemer's grocery shop. He was surprised to find that the store was not open, and this was out of the ordinary for Mr. Bessemer. He would be open and waiting for the bakery delivery every morning. Mr. Zanker knocked on the side door of Mr. Bessemer's home to be answered by a heavily injured Louis Bessemer, who was pointing into the house towards his bedroom. John Zanker entered the bedroom, and to his fright, he found a woman who was covered in blood. He believed it to be Mr. Bessemer's wife. A soaked sheet was covering the woman's body, and he could see obvious head wounds. Mr. Zanker's first thought was to call the police immediately, but Mr. Bessemer wanted to call his own private physician instead of calling the police. Against Bessemer's wishes, Mr. Zanker contacted the police and a charity hospital ambulance. So when the police arrived, they discovered a hatchet that belonged to Louis Bessemer in the bathroom of the home, and the panel on the back door had been removed, likely using a chisel or a screwdriver again. Once the ambulance had arrived, both Louis Bessemer and the woman, who was believed to be his wife, were taken to hospital. When at the hospital, it was discovered that the woman was not Bessemer's wife, but a woman by the name of Anna Harriet Lowe, known as Harriet. She was actually Bessemer's mistress. Harriet Lowe had suffered extensive damage to her head and face from the hatchet. It caused paralysis across one side of her face. After Louis Bessemer was discharged from the hospital, he actually made a visit to Harriet Lowe and referred to her as his wife, Mrs. Bessemer. He had asked to see Mrs. Bessemer when he got to the reception desk and was told there's no one here by that name. When he then asked to see Harriet Lowe, he was refused access to see her. Throughout all of this, there was a number of different kind of strange occurrences around this couple and what had happened in the home and what had happened after. So it was actually believed that Louis Bessemer's wife had actually returned to New Orleans shortly after the attack. She lived in Cincinnati, and I'm not sure if they had lived there together and he had moved to New Orleans the 3 months prior, but I believe that is what has happened. So throughout the investigation, Harriet Lowe had made a number of different bizarre claims. Initially, she had claimed that she was attacked by a man of mixed race. After this, a 41-year-old black man named Louis Ubicon, who had previously worked for Louis Bessemer in the grocery shop. He was arrested under suspicion and had provided conflicting stories about his whereabouts at the time of the crime taking place, so he was held and questioned for longer. Louis Ubicon was not charged with the crime because there was not enough evidence against him other than the claim that Harriet had made. She went on then to tell an entirely different story. Harriet then claimed that it was Louis Bessemer himself that had attacked her. She told police that he had beaten her with scale weights after she had found blueprints in his car. She actually claimed that Louis Bessemer was a German spy. So whenever the police then searched the Bessemer home, they actually found a number of letters that were written in German, Russian, and Yiddish. I was trying to find, through all of this, I was kind of doing some digging on the actual people and trying to find kind of details on their birth history and their actual life history. And with Louis Bessemer, whenever I actually started looking into him, I tried searching with the thought that he would have been from Poland because he had claimed to be a Polish national. but I couldn't find anything. I did find a German Lou Bessemer who would have been around the same kind of age, but it's hard to know if it's the right person because I don't have any other information on his parents, his family, anything like that. But I do think that's interesting that he had claimed to be Polish. There were German letters in his house. There is a German birth record for a Louis Bessemer. There is also a report where neighbours had claimed that the couple living in the house were drug addicts, and whenever the police had searched the house, they did find opiates. The police did then actually start investigating Louis Bessemer and the claim that he was a spy. It kind of seems like a bold claim, but considering his actions after the attack and the fact that he didn't want the police to be called, he wanted his private physician, and he acted strange. So it's not completely impossible. Whenever the police were investigating what happened at the house, he had told the police that he wanted to investigate it himself. So that was the other kind of fishy little snippet that I found. The police actually took the claim quite seriously, and Bessemer was arrested and a government investigation was started. Bessemer was released 2 days after his arrest, and 2 of the lead investigators were demoted due to unacceptable police work. Because of the extensive injury to Harriet Lowe's face, she had to undergo surgery. Sadly, she passed away 2 days after the surgery on the 5th of August 1918, and the investigation was now a murder investigation. Following all of the accusations that Harriet Lowe had made, Bessemer was arrested again in August 1918 and charged with murder. He served 9 months and was later acquitted due to lack of evidence on the 1st of May. This one is it's actually not the strangest. A couple of these attacks or a couple of the family history behind these attacks is quite strange, and this is up there with one of the strangest. The story of domestic violence, I think, is believable. It's not completely out of the realms of possibility, but over time, this attack was then linked to the Axeman, and the police and the media believed that it was the same person that had killed the Margios who had killed Harriet Lowe. So the third Axeman attack took place in the home of the Schneider family in Elmira Street. Edward Schneider was working on the evening of the 5th of August 1918. His wife Anna, who was 8 months pregnant at the time, was taking a nap in her bed when she awoke to a dark figure standing over her bed. It was reported in the local news at the time that Anna's sister, Mary Gonzalez, who lived next door, had found Anna the following morning severely beaten. Anna's head had been brutally beaten and her scalp was cut open. On investigating, the police couldn't find any sign of forced entry into the house. The weapon that was used on Anna was believed to have been a bedside lamp. A small sum of money was taken from the home, but otherwise there was no sign of a robbery, and a lot of the other valuables were left in the home. Anna did claim that she had actually woken up to an axe hitting her face, but I couldn't find anywhere that an axe was found at the property the way that it had been with the Margios. Police arrested a man named James Gleason who had prior convictions, and I don't believe that these convictions were similar to this crime. He had run from the police whenever they had tried to arrest him, and whenever the police caught up to him, he had told them that he ran because he had just been arrested so many times. The police had no evidence against James Gleason, and he was later released. The case around the Schneider attack went completely cold, but the fear in New Orleans was kind of starting to ramp up a little bit at this time because there were so many attacks within a short space of time, especially where for each attack it was reported that an axe was used. Anna actually then gave birth to a healthy baby girl 2 days after the attack, and I found a family which I believe to have been the Schneiders in the 1920s census for New Orleans still living in Elmira Street. They had a 1-year-old daughter in 1920 named Clara, who I believe is the baby that was born 2 days after, and then 3 older children. Anna's name in the census appears as Mary, but this could be for a variety of different reasons. I know with censuses, I've done family history searches, and a lot of people have kind of changed their name over time or used their middle name and that type of thing. It could also have been if she didn't really want as much attention because her name had been in the newspaper. Only 5 days later, on the 10th of August 1918, Joseph Romano, a 31-year-old Italian barber who was living with his two nieces at the time, Pauline and Mary Bruno, was beaten and killed in his home on Tonti and Gravia Street. His young nieces heard noises coming from Joseph's bedroom and went to see what was happening. They found Joseph beaten and bleeding from an open wound on his head. The girls had also spotted a man fleeing the scene. The description they later gave to the police was that he was a dark-skinned man wearing a suit and a slouched hat. The girls were able to alert the police and the ambulance, and when the police arrived, they found that the house had been ransacked, but there appeared to be no valuables or money taken. They discovered that the panel on the back door had been chiselled off, and a bloody axe was found in the Romano backyard. Neighbours had reported that they were not sleeping due to fear, and the latest attack just added extra anxiety to the people of New Orleans. Joseph Romano survived only 2 days after the attack. He died from the head injury that he had endured on the 12th of August, 1918. His death certificate states fracture to vault of skull. A retired Italian police detective had stated at the time that he believed that the case was linked to that of the Margios and that the same assailant had carried out similar crimes in 1911. In between the murder of Joseph Romano and the next known attack, there were a couple of reports of attempted break-ins to different homes around the city. Now, I could probably do a second video on this whole case because there is so much more to it, including all of the attempted break-ins, and with a lot of them, there were attempted break-ins where the people then went outside to find axes and chisels in their yards. I'm going to tell you about the fourth attack now, which is attributed to the Axeman. It involved the Cortamiglia family. The crime took place just across the Mississippi River in a city called Gretna, Louisiana. Charles Cortamiglia and his wife Rosie, or Rosa, ran a grocery store on the corner of Jefferson Avenue and 2nd Street. 2 years earlier, the couple had welcomed their daughter Mary. On the night of the 10th of March 1919, screams were heard from the family home, similar to most grocers at the time. The Cortamiglia family lived in the adjoining rooms to their grocer. A neighbour and fellow grocer named Iolando Giordano ran to the house to see what was going on, and what he found was absolutely horrifying. When he went into the home, Iolando found Rosie covered in blood with an opened head wound. The mother was holding her young child, who sadly was no longer alive. Charles Cortamiglia was found lying on the floor, covered in blood. Iolando had alerted the police and the ambulance service, and the family were taken to the charity hospital where Mary was pronounced dead due to a blow to the back of the head. During their investigation, police found that the back door panel of the Cortamiglia home had been removed. Nothing had been stolen from the home, and then police also found a bloody axe on the porch. It appeared to everyone that the Axeman was now moving into Gretna as well as New Orleans. When Rosie awoke from possibly a coma or exhaustion, the devastated mother accused the helpful neighbour Iolando Giordano and his son Frank of committing the attack and murdering her daughter. Charles was released from the hospital two days after the attack, denying these claims, but the police took Rosie's word for it, and Iolando and Frank were charged with murder. The pair were found guilty by a jury. Iolando was sentenced to life in prison, and his 18-year-old son was sentenced to death by hanging. A number of months later, Rosie admitted that this claim was in fact untrue. She claimed that the police had forced her into accusing the men by threatening her with being held in jail herself. Charles and Rosie had divorced shortly after the trial. However, it seems like the couple's relationship may have been on and off for a while. I actually found an article about these two stating that Rosie Was arrested during a raid in a hotel on Bienville Street and charged with violation of moral code. The article also had said that Charles, who had said that he would never take her back again, had taken her back again. They'd started their relationship again, and it seems like it could be possibly because at the time Rosie had said, this was reported in the newspaper too, that Rosie had said that she would kill herself if Charles never took her back. So it seems like the couple were on and off, and I don't know if Rosie's behaviour has come from what had happened to her child, or if it was already there, but you couldn't even imagine having to go through that anyway. I thought it was interesting to add that because it's easy to talk about crimes and kind of forget that they are people who have lives and are impacted by these things. Months after the Cortemiglia attack, on the 10th of August 1919, another grocer named Steve Boker, he woke during the night to a dark figure standing over his bed. The intruder proceeded to hit Mr. Boker over the head with what he believed was an axe. Mr. Boker was knocked unconscious, and when he came to, he was able to walk to a neighbour's house to get help. It's reported that when he got to the neighbour's home, he passed out until the ambulance arrived. I wasn't able to find much more on this particular attack, but it's another attack that was attributed to the Axeman because Steve Boker had awoke to someone hitting him with an axe. Shortly after the attack on Steve Boker, on the 3rd of September 1919, a 19-year-old woman named Sarah Lauman was attacked in her bed whilst home alone. One of the articles that I had seen online states that Sarah had lived on her own, but I did find a Sarah Lauman that was around the same age in 1920, and it looks as if she had been living with her parents at that time. So it could be a case she moved in with her parents after the attack, or I'm not sure if it was her parents' home she was in, but she was home alone when she was attacked. It's believed that the attacker had entered the home through a window and attacked Sarah with an axe. An axe was later found on the front yard of the home. Sarah was badly beaten with severe head injuries and could not recall the attack. The last attack that is linked to the Axeman is a particularly interesting one. This one is probably the kind of most out there. Now, it is similar to others in the sense that the person attacked was a grocer. However, it is a little bit questionable. So, on the 27th of October 1919, another Italian grocer, 36-year-old Mike Pipitone, was attacked in his home on the corner of South Scott and Ulloa Street. Mike had gone to bed that night with Esther, his wife, who was awoken during the night to her husband's groans. When she woke, she claimed that she saw two figures escaping the house through the hallway which passed the bedrooms of the 6 Pipitone children. There was blood all over the bedroom and her husband's head had been badly beaten. When questioned by the police on how she had slept through the attack, Esther declared that she's a heavy sleeper. Police found a large bolt which appears to have been used as the murder weapon, and the case of Mike Pipitone's murder went cold. So the events that took place before and after this attack around Pipitone family is kind of what makes this one extremely kind of complex. So it also kind of throws into question if this was an Axeman, if it should be attributed to the Axeman. So 9 years earlier, both Mike and Esther were questioned in a different murder investigation. Mike's father, Peter Pipitone, was charged with the murder of a man who was supposedly threatening and attacking his shop and home. Mike was present at the time that Peter shot the man and was actually charged alongside his father and later acquitted. His father was convicted and sentenced to a prison sentence. In the newspaper article from the time, Esther was noted as having been a material witness. After the murder of her husband, Esther, who was born Pasquale Albano, left New Orleans and moved to Los Angeles with her children. She married a man who she had known from New Orleans named Angelo Albano. On the 27th of October, 1921, Angelo Albano left the home he shared with Esther, supposedly singing a happy tune. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but he was never seen again. After her husband had disappeared, Esther questioned a friend of her husband on his whereabouts. This friend was a man called Joseph Mumphrey. Mumphrey was a pharmacist with a criminal history of extorting money from grocery shop owners. Mumphrey had been unaware that Albano and Esther were married at the time of her questioning him, and he informed her that Albano had owed money and that the wife and family would soon have to pay up. Esther's account of the events is that Mumphrey had threatened to kill her as he did her husband if she didn't pay him $500. The conversation ended by Esther using 2 pistols to shoot Joseph Mumphrey. She shot him at least 8 times, killing him. After the shooting, Esther went to a shop close by and asked the owner to call the police. When she was questioned, Esther claimed self-defense as she was in fear for her life. Joseph Mumphrey was found to have had a pistol in his pocket. Esther was acquitted of Joseph Mumphrey's murder on the 10th of April 1922. She then moved, along with her children, back to New Orleans, where she then lived until she died in 1940. A couple of the very weird things that I found about this one, particularly surrounding Esther. From what I can tell, Esther was born Pasquale Albano. So she went on to marry a man called Angelo Albano, who she supposedly knew from New Orleans. Now, it could be a coincidence that they have the same surname. But, yeah. With this whole case, I think because a lot of the victims were Italian, there was always a question of whether there was mafia involvement or something bigger, and it wasn't just one person. But I think throughout all of this, throughout all of the attacks happening, the newspapers were reporting all of these crimes, and where they saw the similarities, where the police saw the similarities with the axe, it was then attributed to the same person, and it was put in the name the Axeman, I believe, came from the media. It came from the newspapers. So the last thing that I actually want to talk about is a letter that was written to the newspaper in New Orleans. It's the Times-Picayune, and the letter was addressed from the Axeman, but whether or not it came from the Axeman is a different story. It could be a hoax, but it's believed that it is. So this letter, it was sent on the 13th of March 1919. The Times-Picayune newspaper received a letter, and it was addressed to esteemed mortal of New Orleans from hottest hell. So the person who wrote the letter claimed to be the Axeman, and the gist of the letter was that the writer was not human, but a demon from the hottest hell who could never be caught. They wrote that they were very fond of jazz music and would be passing over New Orleans at 12:15 on Tuesday night, and that they swore by all the devils in the nether regions that all those would be spared whose homes had a jazz band in full swing. After the death of Mary Cortimiglia, there was a break in the attacks until that of Steve Boker on the 12th of August. So it's hard to say if the person writing was actually the Axeman or if the letter was a hoax and the attack stopped for some other reason, because it's quite a stretched period. So the person who had committed the previous attack could have been in prison or anything. The other thing to note is the police at the time didn't have the advanced technology that we have now, and when it comes to inspecting a crime scene, it was done very, very differently. So the presumption that all of these cases were carried out by the same person or people, it could be because of the fear that was put into New Orleans at the time by the media, by the police, it could be that it was the same person and that all of the crimes were connected, but I do think these are just my thoughts, and I don't mean to offend anybody or anything like that, but this is just what I'm getting from having looked into it. A few of them were Italian grocers, a few of them were Italian, that's the link with that. And now with the Pipitone family, I think it's different because the circumstances seem to be different, and there's a lot of strange kind of outside stories with that one. But with the likes of the Schneider family and Sarah Lauman, they just seem a little bit out of place. But I'm not a police officer or an investigator or an FBI agent. I don't know what I'm talking about half the time, but yeah, I don't think this story is always kind of, it's not really reported as much as any of the other serial murder cases or anything like that, because it's unsolved, because they never knew who had committed any of these crimes. It's something that we're probably never going to know the answer to. So it is one of those cases that we can look at now, or we look at now in this time, and can only make our own sort of assumptions and that kind of thing. It's bizarre. There's so much more to it as well, because there were different attacks in between, and there was also a story of a man running out into the street claiming that the Axeman was trying to break into his house, and then chasing the man that he thought was trying to break in. But it ended up that the two men were arrested and nothing came from it. There's a lot of different stories at the time, but I think we have a lot of fear mongering in the news and that kind of thing now. But back in the early 1900s, we don't know. Like I find all of that so interesting. It would be so interesting to know what all of that was like then. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm sorry it's a bit long, but I wanted to share it with you because I've tried to find as much as I can on each of the victims, and I hope that it was done in a respectful way and me kind of making my assumptions about what happened. I do not intend for it to be disrespectful towards any of the victims of any of these crimes, because what happened to each person was awful, and sadly we will probably never know who it was that had attacked and killed these people. I really hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that you were able to relax and listen, and yeah, it's good to be back. So I'm going to leave it at that, and we'll see you again.